Hello, wonderful people from around the world. My name is Ekaterina, and I'm co-founder of Future London Academy. And today, in our agency growth stories, we have an incredible guest. Emily is the co-founder of Red Antler. And Red Antler is an incredible branding and creative consultancy that works with startups and growing companies and creates incredible brands that are strong and that are lasting and they're unique and they're very special. And Emily, apart from being a co-founder and working with companies like Allbirds, Casper, Supergoop, Hinge, and you name it, the startup you probably heard is the biggest and the fastest growing. Probably Emily was the brain and the brand behind the brand. And also Emily was named most important entrepreneur of the decade by Inc. magazine, and also one of entrepreneurs' most powerful women of 2019. So I feel very honored to be in this conversation with Emily because we'll talk about all sorts of things that made Red Antler successful and also mistakes that Emily made as part of Antler's growth journey to now almost 100 people. Would love to start with a rapid fire question. Which will hopefully keep our energy up for the rest of the conversation. Are you ready?
I hope so.
Hope so. Great. That's a great answer already. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Enthusiastic, creative, and warm, I hope.
Warm sounds lovely. Brand you would love to work with, but still haven't had a chance.
I want to brand a country, and I'm open to which one, but I would love to do a brand project for a tourism board of a country.
That sounds really exciting and yeah, definitely a big one. What's the most important quality for a founder?
Tenacity.
Could not agree more with this. What's your guilty pleasure?
I actually am not guilty about any of my pleasures. I relish in all of them.
This is the best answer. Thank you. Book that inspired you or changed your mind on something?
God, I read so much. I just read an amazing book. So I'm going to go with recency bias, but I read a book called Wellness by Nathan Hicks. It's fiction, but it is such an amazing combination of very modern and very timeless themes. And nothing inspires me more than reading a great novel. So I'm going to go with that one.
Great choice. And I would also add to the recommendation your own book, Obsessed, Building a Brand People Love from Day One, which is a great recommendation for anyone listening to us, because that's a fantastic book that won lots of awards as well, and a continuation from this conversation. So definitely a good choice for everyone to check out. Professional achievement you are the most proud of?
Building an incredible team of people.
And we'll talk about this later. And what is the best part about working at Red Antler?
Being able to work across so many different industries on so many different clients. I feel like every day I'm learning something new and it never gets boring.
That's a great start because definitely something that never gets boring must create a lot of passion for you every day. So would love to hear, how do you keep your curiosity up and keep this passion up no matter how big your agency grows? But let's start from the very beginning. You worked in advertising since early 2000s. You built a successful career working side by side, HWT, and some of the other most successful and famous agencies of those times. So you basically had an incredible career, and then you decided that is not enough. And in 2007, you decided to start Red Antler. Can you tell a little bit more about why this company? Why did you decide to start something of your own?
Yeah, so there was an intermediate step, which I think is a really important part of my journey, because truthfully, I don't think I personally would have had the courage to leave my job at JWT, which is a huge global agency where I was making a nice salary and surrounded by a big team, to go off on my own. But what happened in between is that I reconnected with a good friend from my very first job, who's my co-founder. His name's JB. He's amazing. And he had been hired by a New Zealand-based agency who was looking to expand to the States. So even though he and I were both very young, I think they saw opportunity in bringing someone on who was still in many ways at the beginning of their career and very hungry and excited and eager. And he was running their New York office pretty much as a team of one. And I convinced him to bring me on to do that with him. So in some ways, we were running a startup because we were the people on the ground in New York and our bosses were literally around the world. Couldn't have been further. But there was still a safety net because they were paying us a salary. There was an established team in New Zealand. There were established processes. And during the year that he and I were doing that together, it was a really exciting time in New York. So this was 2006. And the startup scene was like just bubbling up. This was kind of like round two of the internet. And we were out there just trying to win any business that we could and started to be introduced to founders who had these amazing ideas for businesses. And when we'd bring these opportunities back to our bosses in New Zealand, it really just wasn't aligned with their vision of why they were expanding to the States. I think they saw the US as an opportunity to win really big budget, advertising work. And we were like, hey, we could do this $5,000 consulting project for this really cool business that we think has incredible potential. So eventually that misalignment became clearer and clearer, and they let us go. They were like, this isn't working out. We've decided to pull our investment in expansion in the States. And at that moment, JB and I were like, you know what? There's opportunity here. We're seeing, this huge white space. No one's really talking about how to use the power of brand to really help launch new things into the world. And that was when Red Antler was born.
Love this story. And I love how optimistic you're about. We were let go. And this was such a brilliant beginning of something new. If only everyone had the same attitude when something happens that you clearly did not expect and maybe we're not planning for. And it's like, yay, this is something where we can start something new and exciting. And clearly it worked out. So that was a great decision.
Yeah. I mean, I was very upset to be let go. Like, I'm a very type A person. I definitely was not expecting that to happen to me in my career. And I definitely got extremely drunk that night. But the next day we were like, you know what? We've got something here.
Again, from every misery, there is always an opportunity. So clearly you turned it around very well. And without that, your wonderful agency would have never existed, and we would never known how cool some brands could grow and be. So thank you for that, and thanks for your former employer for letting you go. In terms of when you started, obviously that's exciting in theory to start a company. Now you need clients, and as far as I know, the story you had Scott Belsky, the founder of Behance, who basically said, you know what, I will be your first client, and kind of that gave you another safety net to actually start. So how did this come about, and what did you agree on?
Yeah, so you really did your research. I'm very impressed. So Scott was one of the entrepreneurs that we had been bringing back to the bosses in New Zealand as a potential opportunity. And if you're not familiar with Scott Belsky, he's just an unbelievably brilliant entrepreneur. And at the time, he had this crazy idea to start a creative network, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's called Behance. It has since been acquired by Adobe, which is where Scott now works. But he was just like working through it in his head. He was like, I see this opportunity. LinkedIn doesn't really serve the needs of the creative community. Let's build this platform that can really showcase creative talent in a way that's never been done before. And because we knew that Scott would hire us, I think it was a lot easier on day one to be like, we've got something here. Maybe other people would hire us too. Not to mention, it just gave us something to like do every day. Like, Scott brought us on immediately. He helped us sort of think through what Red Antler could be. He helped us see the potential. We did so much work for them in those early years, especially when they were one of our only clients, which was an incredible experience because I got a front row seat as to like how to build a startup and a product company. We were sitting in on product meetings. We were doing so much more than just what you might think of as brand. We were sitting through feature ideation and thinking how that connects back to the mission. And we were working out of their offices for the first 2 years of Red Antler. So that was an incredible education. It certainly gave us the confidence to move forward. I still credit Scott for so much of, the success that we saw in later years.
This is brilliant. And I love that, as you said, you had basically a front row seat to company that was growing. So you as a growing company could learn obviously from their growth and what they're doing, which is probably the best thing you could ever hope for. But I wonder at the moment when you were starting it, where was Behance at that point? Was it already did you already know that it will be successful? And clearly, if they had budget to spend on branding, they at least had some investment at that point. So what was it when you were working with them?
So it did not exist. There were 3 people there. It was, we were there like pre-launch, and they had a very small budget. Again, like I think that, and I don't regret a minute of it, but like we ended up doing a lot more work for them than the actual financials of what we were getting paid. Because sort of anytime we had free time, we were like, let's spend it on Behance, let's join all the meetings. In some ways, we were functioning as part of their team while we were also out there trying to grow Red Antler. So, that was our first and one of our last retainer clients. We actually don't typically work on retainer, but like we were getting paid a very small, but what they could afford at the time, monthly retainer. And again, embedded within their team as they were working to launch the network and then beyond.
That is really exciting to hear. And I can imagine that's very interesting to see the development of something that kind of comes from their idea and suddenly starts growing in front of you. I wonder if that was kind of the insight that gave you the idea that you should work with startups as your main kind of core audience?
No, it absolutely was. I think that it was the year at the New Zealand company leading up to us starting to work with Behance. That was it, and conversations with Scott as well, where he was like, there are all these companies that are launching. They don't know how to do what you do. Like there is something here. It was directly what influenced our decision to work with startups. And it's hard to remember it now because startups, like the whole landscape has obviously changed so much over the past, over a decade and a half. But at the time, there was literally zero conversation happening about the need for startups to think about their brand. There was just starting to be a conversation about the importance of design, but that was strictly in the realm of UX design. And even that was controversial. Like we were still living in the days of like, if the idea is good enough, the internet looked really, really different then. Like we launched Red Antler the same year the iPhone launched. So it's hard now to sort of remember what it was like, but it was a really different time. And I think that we had this hypothesis that people thought was kind of crazy, that startups should focus on their brand identity before they launch. Even our parents were like, startups, honey, like they don't have any money. Like, could you think of a different client, to focus on? But we felt very strongly that brand could be a competitive differentiator, a driver of business growth, sort of an edge that would help businesses launch with a greater advantage. And it obviously proved out to be true.
I think I would probably everyone in this, all our listeners could agree with that fact that it's clear now that brand is a massive contributor to company success and can basically transform any company, but also help its growth. But you're right, at that point, it wasn't part of the conversation. And working with startups probably was such a controversial decision. As you said, there is no money there. Like it's not really a very strategic kind of idea. It kind of reminds me of Clayton Christensen's innovation dilemma, kind of the whole idea that you kind of find like something the big companies don't want to serve because it's too small, it's too risky, it's not something that a big company sees as a profitable I suppose route, and as a small company you can afford to take those risks and you start growing from there, which is clearly what happened to your team as well.
100%. In the early days, we were the only game in town. No one was even trying to work with the businesses that we were working with. So it was nice to have those years where like we pretty much had zero competition. I mean, the difference was I'd actually say that our competition in those early years was teams doing nothing. Like we were having to convince people that they should invest in this at all. But once we could convince them of that, like we were the only choice. I'd say now it's different that everybody knows they need this. So we're not having to convince people of like the value of branding, but we do now have to convince them of the value of us.
I was wondering, how do you work from the financial and business perspective? Because again, in theory, it all sounds great. You found a niche and it potentially can grow. But again, it comes with risks. Startups shut down, they change their mind, they don't have budget. So how did you define actually who can actually pay for your services?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it is worth noting that we are primarily, when we're working with startups, working with venture-backed startups. Like these are startups that are on a fundraising track. And with that comes an expectation of scale. So I think if you had a 2-person business that was opening, a local store and never wanted to grow beyond that, like they wouldn't be able to afford us, but it also wouldn't make sense for them to afford us. Like they shouldn't afford us. We're working with businesses that are really looking to grow and grow big. So that's a piece of it. I think that in the early days, we charged less and we also had less expertise, fewer people on the team. We were, bringing less experience to the table. I think our fees have gone up through the years because we have a proven track record. We have much deeper bench of people with greater expertise now. And then, truthfully, if there's something that we're like really, really excited about and really want to work on and they can't afford our fees, that's when we'll often get creative too. And, we'll sometimes do work for a mix of cash and equity. I think that in those cases, the biggest mistake you could make is sort of counting on the equity, because you're right, like anything could happen. And best case scenario, you have a great outcome. That's still 5 to 7 years out, right? You still need to pay your team today, but that has also been part of our model through the years.
And were there any stories of when it didn't work out? So I suppose, what was the worst that happened? You worked in a year, or like what was the worst that you've experienced during those early years?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a couple times, thankfully rare, where like we literally just don't get paid and there's kind of like no recourse, right? I mean, we try to have like an invoicing schedule that prevents us from totally not getting paid. But, if you're working with a founder and you've built a relationship and then something happens where they're not able to raise their next round of funding or whatever, right? Something unanticipated and they can't pay you, like, what are you going to do? You're not going to like sue them, but that's very, very rare. I think that more often what might happen is, we get paid our fee and then we have equity in a business and, for any number of reasons, it just doesn't pay out. I mean, that happens all the time. That's kind of the name of the game. And you have to expect that, which again is why you cannot count on equity as revenue.
That is a very good advice. And I think, actually, I'm surprised only a few cases of startups not working out. And I wonder if there was any strategic, I suppose, decision-making, how you selected, apart from the fact that they're venture-backed. Was there any other things that you were looking for when you approached the startup?
Oh, yeah. We are very, very choosy about who we work with. And there's a number of factors. I mean, one of them is just our belief in the idea, feeling like we agree that this is something the world needs. We see potential. Like, we're not going to just say yes to anything, even if they do have the money to pay us. Like, we're not going to put our time against something that we don't think actually is going to succeed in the world and answer an unmet need. Belief in the founding team, feeling like they're the right people to pull it off, that they're committed, that they have what it takes to, sort of go the long haul, which we all know is, usually even longer than you want it to be. Often our clients are coming through referrals. So I think that is part of where like the venture back component comes in, is that, they've been vetted already by an investor who we trust. But yeah, there's a lot of different factors. And I think that we've had plenty of clients who ultimately like don't become like the next big thing, right? It's very unpredictable. But I think that most of them, are still at it and still, working hard and in one way or another are gonna pull it off.
From there, I suppose you found this niche and you thought, okay, this can work. We enjoy it. It's something exciting. And at that point, it was just you and your co-founder, JB, who were like running everything. So where did you realize you need to grow beyond just two of you doing everything from client management to winning new business to actual execution?
So in the first couple years, we were relying on a regular sort of roster of freelancers that we were pulling in for each project. And I think that when we were a couple years in, we realized that like we were growing and it was becoming truthfully increasingly stressful to feel that we did not have control over every element of our output. Even though these were freelancers who we knew, who we trusted, sometimes they'd be booked up on a job and you'd have to go with someone that you knew less well, or, they'd be unresponsive during a client emergency because they didn't have as much sort of at stake as we had. So it was in 2010 that we actually brought on a third partner who, for a decade was with us. He actually eventually ended up having to move back to New Zealand where his family's from. But at that moment in time, when we brought him on, it was with the concerted effort of like, okay, from here, we're going to start growing a team and have all of these capabilities in-house versus trying to like cobble it together every time a project comes in.
How did this growth happen? Was it basically one day you woke up and, okay, we need to hire 20 designers to support our current project?
Luckily, it was not 20 overnight. All of our growth, including to this day, was incredibly organic. It was, in those early days, again, we were just focused on like doing great work. We were in a small niche. It was a small community. We were like the only game in town. And founders talked to each other and they just started referring us, or an investor in one business that we worked on was then, involved in another business that was launching, and our network just started to build that way. And it's not like we had this really clear ambition of like, oh, in 3 years, we want our revenue to be X and our team needs to be this size to support that. It was really more that like opportunities were coming in the door and we were excited about all of them and we didn't want to say no to them. So I think that in those early years, we almost would have had to decide not to grow. Like the path of least resistance in some ways was growth. And I think that there came a point where we would have had to say, like, this is it. Like, we're 10 people. We're not going to get bigger. So therefore, the next thing that comes in the door, as exciting as it is, we have to say no to it. But we didn't do that. We just kept going.
That is a great way to grow a company when there are too many clients knocking on your door and wanting your services, clearly proving that the work you've been doing was making waves. Were there any business development from your side? I don't know, you were going to startup events to meet lots of founders, or like any kind of PR or anything else that kind of supported that growth?
No, not in those early years. It was all through referral, word of mouth. And I think that there was a long period of time where like nobody outside of the startup community had heard of us. And that was okay with us back then too. Like we were really just like, we're going to do the best possible job that we can do on all of our clients. And then that will be our business development strategy. We would sometimes go like speak at accelerators or sort of do more things to just bolster our network in the startup community at large. But all of our new work came in through word of mouth. And that's largely even true to this day. I mean, I think that we have a greater public reputation now, but it was many, many years before we invested in like our own brand and getting the word out beyond people who just naturally heard about us from other clients.
And was the second client, I suppose, after Behance also word of mouth, or was it kind of, how did the second client come about?
The second client came about, so I guess we did attend an event. JB was at, I feel like it was Expo West or maybe it was Expo East. It was like one of those food events. And he ran into a guy who he knew from a previous thing who was starting an energy powder called eBoost. Truthfully, I mean, we learned so much from the Behance experience, but we can directly trace the path of the growth in our first year to eBoost more than Behance in some ways, because the investors in eBoost then started an email newsletter called Tasting Table. This was like the era of the email newsletter. That was like the big thing back then. And we worked on Tasting Table. And then that connected us to a business called One Kings Lane. So it's sort of like, that's the one that kind of you trace it all. There's a clear through line between like someone worked on this and then was involved in that. And then it snowballed from there.
Brilliant. So when you got to the stage of this, I suppose 10, 20 people, and I say 10, 20 or maybe 30, because that's usually the stage where a lot of agencies get comfortable. Like you can service enough clients and you also still feel happy doing the work. Because as soon as you start growing beyond that, as a creative, you will be doing less and less of creative work and it will be more and more of other work. So how did that transition come? Was there any point where you're like, okay, now is the time to step further?
I wish that I could say that we had this like incredible intentionality around our growth. But again, it really just came from opportunities coming our way that we wanted to be involved with and therefore needing to grow the team. And I think that it didn't just come from like, oh, we're doing more and more projects. What also started to happen is that some of our early clients started to like grow up and need additional things. And we had to further build out our service offering. So like a very tangible example of that is that in the early days, you know, a startup is not necessarily investing in like a big awareness campaign, right? Like they just don't have the money to even put behind the media to make it worth it. But we were seeing clients sort of reach a level of success where suddenly, you know, it was time to invest in brand awareness and they would need an advertising campaign, which meant we needed capabilities to create an advertising campaign. So we had to build out, you know, a whole new team to ensure that our clients didn't outgrow us. Another thing that started to happen is that our reputation grew beyond startups. And this was sort of, I don't know how many years in, it's hard for me to say, but like, let's say it was 5 or 6 years in where, you know, more traditional or later stage startups started to catch wind of the work that we were doing and were interested in potentially working with us. And it just requires more people to work with like a bigger, more complex organization for a million reasons. Like you need more robust project management. You know, you probably need, you know, a couple different people that are servicing the client and sort of keeping that relationship strong. So at that point, you know, you just cannot run like a super lean project team and still service the client properly. So we could have just said like, no, we're not going to take on this type of work, but it actually to us represented like a really exciting potential to diversify our client base. And now, you know, the pre-launch startup work, it's still a really important part of who we are, but it's by no means all that we do.
So what were the structural things that you started implementing? As you said, as you start growing, your team cannot be lean. And we hear that from every agency growth story that first you grow very much organically because the demand just comes your way if you're a great agency, but then you have to hire the strategic kind of pillars. And especially with hiring senior talent, I've heard you mention that at some point you had to start hiring people that are more experienced and senior than you. Who were you hiring as a priority at those stages? And also, how did you go about finding these people?
I think this is an area where we really messed up. So if you all want to learn from like what not to do, you know, I think in the early days, we had a very junior team. I mean, by the way, including me, like I was younger back then. And because of that, like it was a relatively inexpensive team. And I think that because of all our growth was sort of happening organically and like responding to needs, we were too slow to bring on like another layer of leadership. And I think that, you know, it felt at the time like, how are we going to afford this? Like we can't, but I think that ends up being like a really costly mistake. And being in a position now where like we have an incredible chief people officer, like she's amazing. Like I rely on her like every single day. I'm like, I don't even know how I would like function without this person. But there were years and years where like we did not have a proper like level of seniority in that role. And it felt like a nice to have, right? It's like, the most important thing is that we have the creative talent. Like, you know, we sort of deprioritized that, the more operational part of the business, but it made everything so much harder. And I think it's really easy to just like throw bodies at a problem, like just keep hiring to get the work done, but you're not actually learning to work smarter. And it actually ends up costing you more in so many ways, including like burning people out and people getting frustrated. So like there were some really tough years in there.
So if you had to go back to start an agency from scratch, maybe now, who would you hire to which stage? Like what would be the ideal journey of agency from 0 to, let's say, 90 people that you are now?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, I can't even imagine. I would, you know, it's really hard, right? It's like all these decisions at the time we were doing what felt feasible. So it's hard to say exactly, but I think that bringing in someone very early who had already successfully like scaled a team, who could be in like, whether it's a managing director or a director or like a head of ops, like somebody that had like seen these things before and brought that experience would have just been unbelievably helpful. So we weren't just like learning through trial and error. I think again, on the people front, I don't even want to call it HR because I think that you say HR and people think that that's just like benefits administration, which by the way is important too. But I think having someone whose like role is ensuring people happiness, ensuring people have clear paths to growth, can be a sounding board if your team is struggling or unhappy or whatever else it might be, helping with hiring, helping with firing. I hate to say it, but like firing is really, really hard and it's sometimes necessary. And like, I think that's something that I have handled terribly at parts in my career because I didn't know how to do it. So I think that's a role that we waited too long to like really bring in someone very, very senior. Finance too, that's another one where it's like you reach a certain scale, you want to have, whether it's a head of finance or a CFO, somebody that's like knows how to put systems in place, is going to catch things that you don't, is strategic. And that's another one where I think we waited too long. But now we've got all those people and it's incredible.
So when you say earlier stage, what would it be? Because I think there is another danger of bringing senior people too early and they just get bored because there are not enough challenging problems for them to solve. And they also don't like to be that hands-on. So is it 20 people we are talking about earlier or 50?
Yeah, I people told me that like the jump from 20 to 50 is the hardest jump. I think that's probably true. I feel like 20, you're at a size. Well, look, now we're all on Zoom, so it's a little, I don't know how it would be now, but like when we were 20, we were all in the office. You could like implement a new process just like live and everybody's there to like see it and do it and get it, like it's when you move beyond that suddenly like you're having to put systems in place and like codify things that before you could just sort of almost take knowledge sharing for granted. And I think that's another thing that we did very poorly. I'm like, here are all the ways I fucked up. I feel like culture building, like in the early days, we really took that for granted. We were like, everybody on the team understands like why we exist, what we stand for, why this work's important, what our values are. And it felt almost like forced or unnatural or uncomfortable to like write all that stuff down and like train the team. It felt like corporate. Like I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. But you have to, like you really have to. And now, especially now that we're hybrid, flexible, largely remote, like we have a whole onboarding that's all about like why we exist and what we care about and what that means. And, but there were many years where we sort of expected people to just like get that through osmosis. And at a certain size, that just doesn't happen.
I love that you mentioned processes and kind of these things that creatives, I think, in general hate. Mention timesheets or any sort of things that any creative had to do in their career, that kind of the feeling wasn't the best. But I wonder also what is enough of the process, because again, another side of it, which happens to a lot of companies when they implement too much of the process and kind of that stops creativity and it does become very corporate. So did you ever implement too much process and had to scale it down?
Yes. I think that the danger of process is that sometimes it can replace critical thinking. Like you have to have steps that you're planning to work through loosely. Like you can't be inventing it from scratch every time because that's also distracting from creativity. Like that's the other side of this. If every single time it's like a total blank slate on not only what the work's going to be, but how we're going to do it, that's exhausting. And like that also sucks creative energy. But on the flip side, what you don't want to do is have like such a strict set of steps that nobody's stopping to think like, hold on a second, they asked for this, but like, do they really need this? And in this case, like, do we actually have to spend as much time over here or would we be better off putting that effort over there? So striking that balance where there's like a skeleton, but within it, a lot of room to experiment and play has been really hard. And I'd say like something that we're still working on.
Any good tools that you discovered on this journey, like anything that if again, if you could go back, you're like, okay, do these 3 things or get these 3 tools or something at this stage?
I mean, we like literally just started with a new project management tool. So I definitely don't have the answer there where I'm like, this was our lifesaver. No, that's a good question. That's probably an area where it either doesn't fully exist or we've been weak on it, but like I don't have any like immediate like this is what saved us. I think honestly the best tool for us has just been a lot of communication and transparency and training and, making sure that we're learning in real time, making sure that we're having like timely debriefs when a project wraps, what went well, what didn't, and just having incredibly smart people on the ground who are running the work every day.
I think that's so great that you also couldn't find a great tool. I mean, it's not great, but I think it's very much reflects the challenge of the industry right now. I've heard it from many founders, from many agencies. I don't think anyone cracked it yet. What does it mean to run a creative project? Because you want the space for creativity, but then you need this kind of project management operation that supports that. And there are many routes people have taken. I think people try to get away from just pure time-based kind of planning to more kind of creative and agile ways, closer to how product teams work and tech teams work. I wonder also if that affected your pricing in any way, because again, the reason why people and agencies need those processes is to make sure you understand how much time you actually spend on a project, whether you're still making margins, and therefore how you should price your projects in the future. But then there is another train of thought, I suppose, that is currently happening in the industry, that the cost or the price of your project shouldn't be based on the resources in the team, but more on the opportunity and the impact that you're making to the startup, and especially in the space that you work in, which is very much high growth space where you can make a massive impact with the brand that will double, quadruple, 10x a company just because it's more prominent. So I wonder if the conversation of pricing, and how did you think about pricing throughout the journey as an agency?
Yeah, I'd say it's more of an art than a science. I mean, we do track hours, but we're not billing our clients hourly. So, we have to track hours, to exactly your point, to make sure that like we're running a profitable business and that we're putting in sort of, the amount of time that makes sense. But truthfully, like we often go far over. I mean, that's just the honest truth, right? Like a lot of it is just like, what can this client afford? What's their budget? Do we want to do it? Can we make it work? And then we'll try our best. And sometimes we blow the budget. We're not like a law firm where they're going to sort of pay us however many hours it takes. And I don't even know if I'd want to be. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this little like Picasso anecdote. Do you know that story? Someone told me, oh, it's good. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but when we were first starting Red Antler, we were actually meeting with a lawyer, and he told us a story of how like someone came up to Picasso in a cafe and they were like, hey, can you like sketch me a tree? And he like did a little sketch, and he's like, oh, that'll be, $50,000. They're like, what? That took you 2 seconds? And he's like, it took me 70 years. So anyway, I mean, like, I think that's one of those stories that gets passed around in the creative industry that's probably totally false, but it does stick with me because truthfully, like, I can do something faster than the most junior person on my team. But does that make it less valuable? Like, I don't think so,
Oh, 100%. I think there is the experience and the expertise and the quality that all comes out as a quality of the final outcomes. Talking about you as a person and your journey as a founder as well, how did your role and what you do day to day change throughout these growth stages of getting to these 20, 30 people versus 50 versus what it is now?
So much. In the early days, I was like doing all the work, and then eventually I brought someone on and he and I were like splitting the work, right? But I was still like the person that was, writing, the strategy and writing the copy and working, directly with the designer. I think for me, like psychologically, the biggest shift that I had to go through was learning to take just as much pride in the work of the team, and feeling that like that's my contribution, is sort of like setting up the team for success and feeling as much, satisfaction and reward from that as if I had done it myself. And I am now there, but like that was like an awkward jump for me where I had to get to a place where it was like, okay, like you don't have to be the one who did it to feel a sense of creative fulfillment and achievement. And I'm still very, very hands-on in the work. Like I am not like a figurehead leader. Like I'm on projects, I'm meeting with clients, like I'm in it, but I'm not the one that's like making the stuff. I think a tough leap, and not everybody wants to make that leap. And I think that's okay. Like, I really feel like people need to recognize in themselves where they get satisfaction from. And it might just be that you want to continue to be a maker for your whole career. And that doesn't mean that you're not accomplished.
I love that you talk about this difficult position lots of creatives get to, where you have to stop doing creative work day to day and inspire others to create work. And then I think creatives go into the industry because they want to do, and they want to also get credit for their work. And then it becomes like this very strange transition. But then you kind of go past the stage and you find yourself in new way creating things, like whether it's growing a business or you just creative in other ways. So I suppose from that transition, what else did you need to change as a leader, as a manager, as a person who runs a company, to make sure again it can go further and it can scale? So did anything else change internally or externally, how you do things throughout this journey?
Well, definitely like building in additional layers, making sure that like I don't have too many direct reports who then are being shortchanged because I have like a million other responsibilities on my plate. I think that's a big one is, again, sort of like limiting the number of people that I'm directly managing, and then they've got teams under them. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, maybe if you could expand on the question, I can.
I suppose, were there any mistakes that you made throughout this journey that I suppose you had to fix, and or now reflecting back, you think, okay, if there was new wise me as a person, as a leader, I wouldn't do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like learning that even if it's not the exact way that you would do it, it still can be just as good, if not better. I think like I've always made a big effort not to be a micromanager. And I think that's something, look, who knows, someone can like listen to this and be like, she's totally wrong. But like, I think that's something I have been pretty good at through my career. But in my head, I've had to fight the urge to like have my hand on everything and feel like, oh, that's not exactly what I would have done. Like, let me change it. I think I'm pretty good at actually shutting those voices down, but the voices are or were in there. Now I think I'm finally at a place where I'm actually like just appreciate the unbelievable brilliance and creativity of our team. And I actually love it that they think of things that I wouldn't have thought of. But I definitely had years where I had to fight the urge to like redo it.
Brilliant. I think I could definitely relate to that. I was wondering if the voices ever go away, but thank you. They do. This is good to know.
They do.
Well, I think as again, founders and creative people, we always want to focus on how things can be done amazingly better, perfectly, or whatever. So we always will find things that we would have done differently. That's basically the nature of a creative brain. But you're right. It's finding the appreciation for anything that's happening around you, not just creative work, but in general, how the company is growing or running. I think having that appreciation is, it takes a bit of a stepping back and reflection.
It does. And I think for me, one of the greatest struggles I've had through my entire career is balancing like still caring a tremendous amount and being just as passionate and invested, but also being able to let certain things go. Like, I do think that when you are like trying to pick your battles or whatever phrase you want to use, like let things go, you could quickly get to a place where you become apathetic or you're just sort of like cynical and you're kind of like, who cares anyway? Like, we just make pictures, like, and like, I don't want that either. So it's like finding how to walk that line, especially with client work, where like they might be making a decision and you're like, that is the wrong decision. And it's like, how much am I going to fight this? And how do I, like, if I am going to let this go, how do I do it in a way that's not that I just like stop caring altogether? So I think that's true internally. I think it's true with clients. It's something that like I've really had to work on, is like maintaining like how much I care, but also recognizing like maybe that little thing over there, like that's okay. And that's not mission critical and like it's fine. And this is the thing you actually need to really like fight for and, focus on.
Yeah, picking your fights. I think that's definitely the great mindset to have. So we will be going to the audience questions in few minutes so everyone can start preparing that question. So we try to answer as many as possible. But while we're waiting for everyone to formulate their amazing questions, I would like to talk to you about now and where your company is now and the things that are on your mind now. So first of all, how do you feel about the company? Like, where is it in a rapid growth? It's like in a good, comfortable place. How do you feel about where you are right now?
Definitely not rapid growth right now. I think that like many other companies, I feel like we're still dealing with reverberations from 2020. Like it's just been a crazy few years to be running a business. And I think that we're in a really healthy moment where we're just focused on, what does it mean to be a largely remote workforce? How do we ensure we're working, as well as we can, with a lot of people being like fully remote and many people being hybrid, looking at our client mix and ensuring that it's, the right balance of types of clients and types of businesses. So I think we're like in a moment of like pause, getting as smart as we can, looking inward while also thinking about, are there capabilities that we want to continue to go deeper on? So I think there's growth happening in parts of the business, but we're trying to be really strategic about it and not move too quickly, and not kind of make any choices that we then have to undo.
That totally makes sense. And I think throughout your whole story, you emphasize how very much holistic your growth has been. And I think it only makes sense, especially in any situation, but especially where the market is right now, to kind of have this pause and actually understand what is the right choice and what could be the strategy for the next few years. And we actually have a question from Kelly related to this, which is about current market and what do you feel, how it's changed? Are they facing challenges with growth and many agencies are? What do you think the future for small and mid-sized agencies will be?
I mean, I'm always an optimist, probably to a fault. I think that the current market is like really tough, but I do think that like we're almost dealing with like a fallout from like the crazy growth of 2021 and 2022, where everybody was sort of like let loose and went nuts. So I think we're seeing a rebalancing, and I feel like things will shake out. And my feeling is like things will then start to naturally pick up again, because there's always potential to, launch something new, improve on something, do something better. Like I really do believe that. And I think that, people need to kind of like get out of the current moment of sort of fear and contraction and get back to just doing great business, which I feel is absolutely going to happen.
It's also very interesting that you started the company obviously 2007, 2008, when it was another crisis in the industry, and very much that helped you because lots of people left the companies to start their own startups, and therefore your client base started growing very rapidly. So what do you feel current market will bring good to the situation, and maybe what opportunities you see are opening up because of where we are right now?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, 2008 was like we were barely in business. Like we launched like summer 2007, and we were like, oh my God, like how is this when we decided to start a business? But it ended up being incredible. I mean, I hate talking about our fortune in the amidst so many people like suffered great misfortune that year, but business-wise, it actually did benefit us because a lot of people who were like graduating from MBA programs in 2008, 2009, who normally would have gone and worked for like the big banks or consulting firms, ended up starting their own businesses instead. And I do think that moments of like economic hardship often do prompt innovation. And like even for us right now, it's like there's been so many things that have been on the back burner to-do list in terms of like working smarter, being able to like take on smaller budgets than we thought were possible because we want to be able to continue to work with like the best, most exciting founders. And now this moment in time is sort of like forcing us to solve those things because we have no choice. Whereas I think that if things had just continued to like go up like a rocket ship, we could have had a trajectory where like we're just working with bigger and bigger stuff and move away from, for what me is still the most exciting part, which is that like pre-launch startup work. So it actually in some ways is forcing us to innovate and be nimble in a way that we probably could have avoided if we weren't in this tougher climate right now.
It really resonates with what Steve Bell was saying in our previous episode. So Steve, as a founder of Iris, mentioned how they went through this cycle when the business was great and then it wasn't. And then basically that helped them to actually start putting things in place where they track their budgets a bit more. They actually understand where expenses go. So they created good habits out of that situation that they should have had, but it's just finally they had to do it. And as you said, like, this is an opportunity to innovate, to actually reflect on how you're doing things and potentially do things differently from now on. So I think it's a great start.
100%. When like the money is just like pouring in, it's very easy to ignore problems, and like those problems are still there. So, you know, look, it's obviously more fun when the economy is just like booming and like, you know, the opportunities are flowing. It's, you know, it's stressful for anyone running a business when things are tighter, but it definitely forces you to like fix some things that are only going to help when things then pick back up.
Very true, very true. Eva is asking a question about transparency. You mentioned that transparency was important to you with timely debrief after projects wrap. How transparent are you with your employees about the admin side of things, finances, long-term goals? How do you choose what info to share widely and what not to? Has this changed over time?
It's definitely changed over time. I think that part of what has helped us become more transparent is bringing on a really great CFO who's able to kind of digest, interpret, and communicate financial information in a way that's like the right level of information at every level of the team. And having someone on the team who has a perspective on that and can really like tell the right story. Because I think the thing you have to keep in mind is like, we're not holding back information out of like secrecy or like trying to like trick people. There's a point at which information is also distracting and like not helpful. And I think that like a junior employee on the team like probably doesn't need a full view of the agency's like financial health troubles, whatever it might be. And in many ways that could actually make it harder for them to do their job effectively and focus on what's important to them. So I think that like figuring out what's the right information at what level and ensuring that the information is empowering versus distracting is something that we've really had to continue to work on and learn throughout the years.
That is a great perspective. I think empowering, but not distracting. I think that's a great way to assess anytime you want to share something. Does it empower someone or does it actually distract from the work that we'll be doing? We have a wonderful question from Paco. As an entrepreneur, I imagine you faced tough moments and you were close to quitting. What kept you going? And how did you know you were not being stubborn, forcing yourself into a toxic relationship with your business?
I only had one moment in the trajectory of Red Antler where I was really like, maybe I don't want to do this. And actually looking back on that moment, there were other things in my life that were causing me to be very unhappy. And I was blaming the business when in reality, I actually needed to get out of a different kind of toxic relationship. But I think that, you know, what kept me going at that moment was, first of all, having a great co-founder who like stuck by me and recognized I was going through a hard time and sort of like helped me see it for what it is. So I do think that like, I don't know how people do this alone. I could never be a solo founder. I feel like being able to rely on him and like at that moment in time, he sort of like snapped me out of it and was like, Emily, like you're not quitting. Like we can keep going together. It's almost like having a running partner. So I'd say I probably credit him for that. Yeah.
And how was it like a one day, I suppose, moment, or was it like a few weeks where you were like, okay, I can't do this anymore? How long was this moment of
I had a very bad year, but like again, it was for different reasons. But I think that it takes so much energy and so much drive to do this, that if anything else in your life is difficult, like this is sort of the first thing that you're like, could my life just be easier? Like, would I just be happier, like having a job, you know, like a normal job where it's someone else's problem? Under that, I love what I do. I've always believed in what we're building. I love the team, and like all of that keeps me moving forward, even in moments when I'm kind of like, oh my God, like, is this worth it? Like, how much less stress would I have if I just like clocked in and clocked out every day? But I think that I would also be very unhappy in a situation where I didn't actually have control over the outcome.
I think that's a very common dilemma for entrepreneurs of because you want that creativity, you want to control your own destiny, but it does come with challenges and tough moments. Was there anything specific that your co-founder said at that moment? Because I think we either been in those situations or we have a co-founder in those situations at some point in our journey. So what is helpful to say to someone who is at that stage of like, I'm about to quit, I don't want to do this anymore?
Yeah. And by the way, I never got to the point where I was about to quit, but I definitely was like struggling to find the motivation. I think that he was a really good listener, and I think that he helped me talk through what I was struggling with. And ultimately, you know, in some ways, like your co-founder could be like your therapist, right? Like, you know, he sort of helped me figure out like what's actually at the root of my feelings of unhappiness or exhaustion or whatever else it was that I was feeling. And, you know, these were early days. And I think that what also helped is that we were in the middle of really starting to build a team at that moment in time. So that helped as well, is that like some of that just sort of took the pressure off of me. I think that I was feeling like it was all on us, and like, you know, it was just so immense and hard for me to wrap my head around. And I think as soon as we started bringing on other people, that both energized me and also, you know, took a little bit of the burden away.
Oh, I'm glad that you're mentioning that kind of, it was basically the pain before the growth. And as soon as you kind of got over this hump, actually, it became better.
Yes.
We have lots of questions about retainers, so we have to talk about this. So Paul is asking, you said that you don't take retainers, which is a great way to keep financials and workflow stability. When you started hiring full-time people, were you certain that the work would keep up flowing? What gave you the confidence to make that jump?
Yeah, I mean, like running a project-based business, you could never be certain, but I think that you see trend lines, and a lot of it is about how healthy our like inbound pipeline looks, you know, and sort of how many opportunities are knocking on our door, knowing that only a certain percentage of those are going to like convert into actual projects. So I think that that's one way to measure. I think looking at sort of trends, you know, data over time, you know, do we have a naturally slow season? Does it then pick back up? Like what emerges from this? But, you know, it's another reason not to grow too quickly, because you definitely don't want to be in a cycle of kind of like hiring and then doing a layoff and then hiring again. And I think that is where freelance talent can also be really, really helpful. You know, certain roles, we'd have like a year where we're hiring a freelance person, like almost consistently throughout the year. And then we're like, hold on a second, like clearly there's enough work for this. This is clearly like a job. Let's bring this role in-house.
That's a really good strategy, actually, to try a role or a person as a freelancer and then see if that role exists and kind of bring that internally, and also test what the role is, because I think a lot of the time when it's a new role, you don't know what exactly it might look like. So that journey of working with a freelancer can be a great learning opportunity, even if that's not the person who will join your team eventually.
Exactly. It helps you see like how senior should this person be? What skill sets exactly do they need? It's a nice way to sort of test your way to growth.
Brilliant. We have also lots of questions about your actual work, because we haven't talked about great work that you do. And you obviously work with a lot of great startups, and you have to help them to build their brand. And we actually were having a conversation this morning with our team about brand versus product, and how, especially at the early stage, the lots of startups are focusing on building product, and kind of team brand becomes secondary. not even, maybe they think it is not secondary, but in terms of just physically doing work and actually making decisions, product team takes over while the brand team kind of stays on the side. So we have a question from Natalia of like, do you ever struggle convincing the client the importance of finding their purpose before any other thing? So like, how do you actually go about helping them to build their brand from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to a degree, the clients who are approaching us, at least now, like they know it's important or they wouldn't be reaching out to us, right? But in the early days, it was absolutely a conversation that we needed to be having constantly and really helping people understand like this is not just a box to check, but it's really going to be the thing that makes every other decision moving forward easier. I think that what is to our advantage now is that the startup landscape has gotten so much more competitive. Like when we first started Red Antler, a trend would emerge over the course of a year. We'd be like, wow, like a lot of people are talking about clean beauty. You know, now we will literally within a month meet with 3 teams who are doing like the identical thing. And I think because of that, it's easier to show clients that like just because you have this really great idea doesn't mean that you're going to win. And, you know, you got to be out there in a way that's going to convince people that like you're the one they want to choose, when guaranteed there's somebody who's going to be like neck and neck with you trying to win that same audience over. So I think that that's one, you know, way to approach it. I think also, you know, helping them understand how, again, like brand is not just a logo. Because I think if it were, it's fair. It's like, who cares, right? Like, why would I invest all this money just to have a logo? But that logo stands for like a bigger idea that connects to sort of every part of your business. And I think it's really, really hard to grow a business effectively if you don't have that clarity about why people should care.
And do you have clients who come and say, you actually don't need, you know, this purpose, this everything. We just want nice, I don't know, front page and a logo, and that's all?
Oh yeah, definitely. They're like, let's skip strategy. Like we just need a nice website. Like we share with them that like we cannot do our work without strategy. Like that just doesn't exist for us. You know, I don't even know how we would begin to think about creative choices if we didn't work through a strategic process.
Does it convince them and they're like, okay, now we invest in strategy, or they turn around and say no?
I think the ones that aren't convinced probably walk away, because you can definitely hire a solo designer who's going to be like a hell of a lot cheaper than we are. But I think that the ones who end up working with us recognize that it's actually the combination of strategy and creativity that like makes our work valuable, you know? And I think that we are incredibly strategic. You know, we're not charging a ton or spending a ton on like a discrete upfront strategy phase, because I think that is a very hard sell for clients and usually isn't even necessary. For us, strategy is embedded throughout the entire creative process.
Are there any moments where maybe the strategy changes as well, and the because I think with a lot of early stage companies, product obviously changes, and that's, I suppose, the normal part of the growth, but sometimes even the overall mission of the company can change as they try to navigate the market?
I mean, I think if there's like a hard pivot, that probably requires a rebrand. But I do think when you're working with startups, you learn pretty quickly how to have enough focus to get them off the ground, but build in enough optionality that can account for like the inevitable twists and turns that any business is going to take in its path towards success.
That's a great way to think about. So I suppose to have the flexibility, so already embed this flexibility as part of your brand building process, so they actually can pivot slightly at any point and still keep the brand and everything that you envision for them.
Yeah, like for example, don't give your business an incredibly literal name. Like don't be MailChimp, you know, like you want to make sure that when your business expands, the name doesn't have to change, or you don't have to run media telling people that you're about more than mail.
Great tip. And I think naming is probably one of the biggest pains for a lot of startups, especially in the tech space, when it has to come with the whole idea of simple domain and kind of very much easy recall and internationally appropriate and kind of all the constraints. So do you help companies to come up with their names as well?
Oh yeah. Naming is a big, big, big part of what we do, and it's very hard.
Very hard. I can imagine there are lots of emotional attachments from founders to different names and things that they want to call it.
Yes, it is the absolute hardest part of the process. I think people expect they're going to see a name and it's going to immediately like feel right. Like they want to see the name and immediately feel something, when in reality, I mean, I love to use this example because it's like everybody's favorite brand. If we were sitting here right now and we were like, let's call it Apple, you would not picture the Apple that we know and love today.
Very true, very true. Another thing about how you work with brands that I really loved in the way you described it, you talked a lot about kind of marketing and brand and how they work together, and specifically not differentiating between performance marketing, kind of brand marketing, how everything is a performance and everything is a brand marketing. So therefore, what you are building for companies should very much have attributes of both. So can you talk a little bit more of how you think about marketing as part of your brand strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that marketing is an area that we have definitely like grown through the years, especially as our clients have grown, as the needs of startups have grown. In many ways, it's become increasingly important as the startup landscape has gotten more competitive. And I think that we really try to think about marketing in a very holistic way that is less about what can we say to sell more stuff and more about how are we meeting consumers where they are. And what our head of marketing, she's like brilliant, she always says is like, how are we delivering value beyond just the product, and really thinking about marketing as a way to continue to respond to your consumers' needs in a way that sort of surprises them and grows the relationship and builds loyalty over time.
You mentioned community, and I feel like you have a strong point of view on building communities. So, and I suppose how a lot of companies misunderstand the idea of a community as just likes and engagement. So, can you tell a bit more about how you see community as part of brand building?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that community is incredibly important, but it's become a buzzword that's often interpreted only in its most literal form. And, look, there's going to be certain businesses that have like a very visible online community where people are commenting when they drop a new product and they're excited and they're like paying attention, but like that's not going to make sense for the majority of businesses. And even if you think about the brands in your own life, like how many of them are you like following on Instagram or on TikTok and like engaging with their content? Like probably not that many, but that doesn't mean that you don't feel like you're part of their community. Like the example I always love to use is like, I'm a gay woman who drives a Subaru. That is a real community. You might not know that, but like we lesbians, we love our Subarus. And like, I'm not in like a Facebook group about this, but I feel very connected to that community and it feels like it's part of my identity. So I think that many times community is about shared values and brands making it super clear like what those values are. And it's a little bit more intangible, but that doesn't mean that it's less real or important.
That's a brilliant way to describe it. And as a lot of our listeners know, our mission as Future Land Academy to connect creative communities around the world and give them knowledge and inspiration to make the world a little bit better. So we always kind of try to think of the word community, what does it mean in kind of different spaces, and as you said, like beyond the traditional places where people think about community. And that's why I love these conversations, because that gives us also a little glimpse into people who are in our community, what they're doing, where they're sitting, where they're from, and how do they smile, and all of this, which kind of creates, I don't know, a special feeling for us in our team, always just getting a little bit of an insight of who are the people on the other side and connecting everyone, at least for an hour across the world and on this during this conversation.
Well, I think you're doing an incredible job. So
thank you. That is very kind of you. We probably wouldn't be able to have a conversation today without mentioning AI. It is, yeah, in 2024, difficult topic to avoid. So I suppose what's your perspective on current kind of state of AI within the creative industry, and do you have any practical things you're actually doing with AI in your company?
Yeah, we're using it a lot. So whenever this topic comes up, I always want to be conscious of not saying anything that like we listen to it 2 years later and we're like, my God, she was naive now that like the robot overlords, have me like locked up while they do my job. But for now, in terms of AI's capability, at this moment in time, I think it actually goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes earlier about the role of strategy. And I don't think that there is such a thing as effective creativity without strategy. And I do not think that AI is currently capable of identifying, a compelling, differentiated, unique, and ownable brand strategy and then translating that through to creative. So for now, it's actually just been a really helpful tool for us. We're using it in all kinds of places. We're using it sort of in steps along the process where we want to help convey a vision to our clients, but like we haven't yet gone out and hired an illustrator or shot the thing. So it's really helpful to just sort of like use it to make a sketch to kind of be like, hey, this is what we mean. And sometimes that sketch ends up being good enough that we're all like, look, this could be the final asset. And we're going to actually build these assets, in Midjourney or wherever else. AI is terrible at coming up with names. It's still derivative, right? And I think that we'll have to see how that continues to develop. But for now, I think you can use it to express a vision, but I have not yet seen its ability to actually create that vision. I don't know where it's heading. We're trying to embrace it and not fight it. I think that with any technology, you can sort of live in fear, but like this is happening whether we like it or not. And we have a lot of clients whose products are rooted in AI, and that's been incredibly exciting. A lot of our clients are implementing AI to build very exciting and meaningful businesses. So I think that we've all got to get on this train and figure out, how to stay on it. And I can see how it's scary, but I don't really see an alternative.
I love that you're very positive about the future, and definitely I think there is no reason to be scared of it, or it's very unproductive to be scared of it. The only thing that we could do is actually try and play around with it, and we can't stop it. So we better definitely embrace it and see where it takes us. But I also like how you talked about that strategy is an important piece because, and that's what AI cannot do. And you mentioned the word unique as part of what you built in the strategy. And I think this is definitely something that AI is still not capable of, creating something unique, because by the way it is built, it bases things on things that existed. So creating something unique is still something that humans can do.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is like before AI, there were sites like, I don't know if any of you are familiar with like 99 Designs, I think it was called, where you could like literally go online and get a logo for like $20. And like these logos were horrible. Like to me, like clients would be like, hey, look what I got. I'm like, good luck, So I think that there's a degree to which, you're gonna benefit from realizing how hard this is and recognizing that, like, I don't know, at least again, for this moment in time, I don't think there's a tool that can replace, 6, 7, 8 brilliant, experienced people putting their mind towards a challenge.
And we have a following up question on the strategy part. Eva is asking, you said that you don't usually invest a ton of time in a strategy phase. What are the key things that you try to establish up front about client strategy, and what part of it happens organically throughout the process?
Yeah. And by the way, again, strategy is unbelievably important to us. My point earlier is that I've seen teams spend 2 months and they end in like a 200-page strategy deck, and you read it and you're like, great read, have no idea what to do with this. So for me, your strategy is ultimately only as strong as how it gets executed. And you could spend a lot of time navel gazing and not actually like get into the work, whereas that's where the real magic happens. But strategy is incredibly important. And I think for us, it totally varies client to client, but at the end of the day, it's about ensuring that we have like a succinct, clear, compelling idea of the problem that we're solving for consumers and how this business is uniquely suited to solve that problem. And that is not a description of what the business does, but it's something that goes deeper. And I hate doing this, but I'm going to try to get away from my discomfort about plugging my book, but like I get into this in a lot of detail in my book. So if you are interested in brand strategy and want to understand how I think about it and how we approach it, then I really spend a lot of time, more than we can do in this recording, getting into it in my book.
Brilliant.
Sorry,
And I think
I'm so uncomfortable with self-promotion, but I'm like, I really do talk about this in great detail.
It's
so
a fantastic book. I think everyone should definitely get a copy. So yes, yes to that recommendation. And I think, yeah, you're right. Like you have so much, you consider so many things. So I think it makes sense for you to write them all down and release it as a book for anyone to use in their own work. We have a few more questions about scale and other parts of the business. So Ryan is asking, how do you keep key people with you as you grow and scale and take on larger clients with bigger budgets without giving equity away?
I think that you have to, with your most valued team members, have frequent conversations about what success looks like to them and what's meaningful to them and where they want to see growth. And that includes financial growth. I think that equity is one piece of it, but, I think a lot of people also just like want to feel that they're continuing on a trajectory with more and more financial upside, whether that's salary, bonus, understanding what their targets are, helping them get there in a way that still makes sense for the business, and understanding, what their goals are for their own personal growth. But like, there are going to be people who you can't retain. And I think that that's been another really hard thing for me to accept through the years. But I am finally at a place where I recognize that like, it doesn't always make sense to like hold on to people at any cost. And it doesn't make sense for them and it doesn't make sense for us. And like, we will be okay, even if it's hard in the moment to imagine a future without this key person.
Do you find that the way the talent is attracted to the company and kept in the company in a good way changed throughout the years, not just for your company as a group, but in the industry? Again, we all been through the kind of our parents' generation where it was like, you need to have one job for life. And then there was, I suppose, my generation is usually like 3-4 years at a job, and then kind of people go through different companies. And I feel like now that kind of became even faster in terms of what people look for as a new challenge. So do you feel like that is happening within your company, and how do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, we have incredible tenure like at the leadership levels and on the management team, which is wonderful. And I'm so grateful for. I think that, at the more like maker level, obviously you're going to see more turnover. One thing that's really helped us with retention, honestly, is being more flexible about in person. This is why when everyone's like, you gotta get people back to the office, I'm like, do you? Like, I actually think that for a lot of our team, having the flexibility to like spend 3 months living elsewhere or not come in every day has helped them get the flexibility that they seek and still stay at Red Antler. So I'm really grateful for that. Another thing that we've done, this goes back to a previous topic we were discussing, is we instituted like a principal role where you can advance without becoming a manager. And this was like a big unlock for us because I think that in the past, there was a feeling that like the only path to growth and promotion was to start managing a team, but it doesn't always make sense for the business to like be so layered, and it also doesn't make sense for an individual. So finding other ways to like mark growth without it just being like suddenly you're not making anymore. So those are a couple things, but yeah, I mean, you're always going to be dealing with turnover, and like that's just the nature of the era we live in, the industry we work in. And I think that you've got to find a way to like account for that and not have it feel like this sort of crushing thing every time it happens.
Yeah, I definitely think that's more of an emotional side of things than the technical things. I think that usually affects the founders and the companies. So there is a lot we can do to just accept this part of the industry. Renata is asking about your personal advice. What advice would you give for a small design studio, 13 people, who only focuses on graphic design, no strategy, and is trying to grow? Thank you for speaking.
I guess my first question would be, are you determined not to include strategy in your process? Because I do think if you want to grow, I think that it's going to be, there's a certain scale of client that is just going to need strategy for a process to be successful, even in terms of like selling in the work. I think that focusing solely on design without strategy is definitely going to keep you locked into like a certain size of client and a certain sort of scale of business. And I think it'll ultimately be hard to break out of that if you don't expand your services. So that's one thing. But if you're determined to sort of stick within that realm, it's hard to give a blanket answer. I think it really depends on the industries you're working in, but I would find ways to, as much as possible, mobilize the clients who love you to share the word with others, whatever that might look like. Maybe it's a referral fee, maybe it's just reaching back out, staying top of mind. If you're specializing in certain industries, showing up to industry events, all of that. But again, our growth has really come through an expansion of our offering more than just like doing more and more and more.
And I would echo your advice in a sense that what we've been hearing from other founders throughout this series, that expanding the offering to get closer and closer to the C-level team is always the best way, where you can win bigger clients and bigger budgets, because essentially you will help companies grow. So if as an agency you can help another company grow, they'll love you forever and will share their budgets with you. So therefore, what is this thing that can help them? It is strategy, or is it something else? But yeah, you have to understand the business side as well. Thank you for answering this question, Emily. We are running out of time, unfortunately, even though I feel like everyone has so many more questions that we could discuss and definitely learn from your wisdom. But I have one last question that we ask everyone on this show, which is a bit more philosophical.
Oh boy.
If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
I would change that we're living in a moment where people are living in like alternate realities from each other, this sort of like bifurcation of truth.
Okay. Yeah.
Like in 1 minute. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the most damaging things about the time that we're living in.
Yeah, I feel like definitely there's a lot that we can do better in the way we communicate and the realities that we live in, for sure. But thank you so much for sharing, Emily, and thank you for answering so many questions and being so honest about fun stories and mistakes you made throughout your career. I think it's very refreshing for any founder, and to be honest, any person, to hear that we all are humans and things happen and we all get emotional about certain things, but at the end of the day, we can overcome them and still grow and thrive, and that's what matters. So thank you for being so honest and so positive about things that maybe haven't worked out as well as you wanted, but somehow led you to this path. Is clearly incredibly successful, incredibly inspiring. So thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you all for the wonderful questions, and thank you so much for having me and for the great conversation. I feel like I got very vulnerable, but I appreciate all of you being here for the journey.
Thank you, Emily. And definitely, everyone, go check out the book. It's definitely for anyone who works in branding and strategy. That's something to check out. And anything else, Emily, where people should find you? Any links that you want to share? Any advice you want to give before we finish?
No, I mean, you can follow Red Antler on Instagram. I'm on Instagram too, but that's only if you want to see pictures of a cute 5-year-old. And yeah, that's probably it. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And if everyone enjoyed our conversation, please share any insight, anything that you found helpful, and tag us so we know what to cover next time, what kind of things you found interesting, what kind of things we should talk more about in our next conversation. So anything that you found that we discussed today with Emily that personally helped you or you found inspiring, surprising, please share it and tag us so we know what actually kind of topics what you like. So thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Emily, and until next time, bye.